All right, let's just dive right in. Welcome everyone to today's Explainer. We are going to be exploring a wildly fascinating, highly concentrated area of strangeness tucked away in southeastern Massachusetts. You might know it as the Bridgewater Triangle. It is, essentially, a 200-square-mile vortex of absolute weirdness. If you're the kind of person who loves unpacking history, true crime, and the paranormal, and you like it done in a structured, logical way, well, you're in exactly the right place.
So think about this for a second. What on earth do a 17th century war, a satanic cult, a UFO, and Bigfoot actually have in common? I mean, on the surface, absolutely nothing, right? But geographically, they all share the exact same 200-square-mile footprint. It's wild. And it brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're going to unpack today. This incredibly dense, overwhelming web of documented historical bloodshed, shocking true crime, and totally unexplainable folklore.
Section 1. Welcome to the Triangle. Now, interestingly enough, this region wasn't even given a proper name until the 1970s, which is when cryptozoologist and folklorist Loren Coleman first officially mapped out these boundaries. What is truly staggering here is just the sheer scale and density of what happens inside this triangle. Look at this breakdown. We're talking about unexplainable cryptids, everything from Bigfoot to these 3-foot-tall tricksters known as pukwudgies, all the way to giant thunderbirds. Then you've got the chilling true crime element, including 1980s satanic cult murders and horrific historical asylums. And then, of course, the whole paranormal side of things, boasting centuries of UFO sightings, glowing orbs, and ghosts. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that all these wildly disparate phenomena are happening on top of each other, in one specific geographic location. Right smack in the dead center of all this is the Hockomock Swamp. It's a massive, 17,000-acre wetland, the largest freshwater swamp in Massachusetts, actually. Now, long before European colonists even set foot here, the Wampanoag tribe both revered and feared this area. In their language, Hockomock literally translates to place where spirits dwell. They believed the swamp was the domain of Hockomock, the chief deity of death and disease. Early English colonists caught on to that vibe pretty quickly and went so far as to just call it Devil Swamp. Section 2. A Foundation of Blood. To really wrap our heads around the Bridgewater Triangle, we have to peel back that modern paranormal surface and objectively look at its foundation. And that foundation is built entirely on real, documented, historical bloodshed. You see, we can trace this deeply rooted generational trauma straight back to King Philip's War in the late 17th century. This is widely considered the deadliest war per capita in American history. It kicks off in January 1675, when a native informant named John Sassamon is found dead under the ice, which sparks some intense paranoia and tension. By June, Wampanoag warriors raid the English settlement of Swansea, and things rapidly escalate into this brutal scorched earth conflict. Fast forward to August 12, 1676, the native leader Metacom, who the English called King Philip, is killed. Shortly after, on August 28th, his chief military captain, Anawan, surrenders to colonial forces.
40%. That is a number that should just stop you in your tracks. An estimated 40% of the indigenous population in southern New England perished during this war. Thousands were publicly executed, starved to death in the swamps, were shipped off and sold into slavery in the Caribbean. Their land was effectively completely confiscated by the settlers. It left a profound, literal stain on this very soil.
And this comparison perfectly captures how that historical trauma morphs into modern folklore. On one hand, we have the empirical historical facts of Anawan's surrender at a site we now call Anawan Rock. Captain Benjamin Church's own memoir from 1716 describes a tactical, surprise capture that ended in a totally bloodless surrender, with Anawan handing over his wampum belts. But contrast that grounded history with the local folklore that persists today. Locals swear those very woods are filled with phantom campfires and the echoing cries of Ayutash, which is a Wampanoag war cry meaning stand and fight. It's a textbook example of tragic history bleeding into supernatural legend.
Section 3. Asylums and True Crime. As we move out of the colonial era and transition into the 19th and 20th centuries, this landscape didn't just witness war. It became the backdrop for severe institutional abuse and truly shocking crime.
Listen to this confession for a second. To have killed more people, helpless people, than any other man or woman who has ever lived. That was the stated literal ambition of Jane Toppin. She was a nurse and a female serial killer in the late 1800s who genuinely enjoyed experimenting on her elderly, frail patients, dosing them with lethal combinations of morphine and atropine. She confessed to 31 murders, but researchers suspect she's responsible for nearly 100. And guess where she spent the rest of her life after being found not guilty by reason of insanity? Right inside the Bridgewater Triangle.
Specifically, she was committed to Taunton State Hospital. Opened in 1854, this facility became notorious for absolutely horrendous conditions. For years, there were persistent rumors that staff were literally dragging patients into the basement to conduct dark satanic rituals. Add to that the terrifying paranormal reports from both patients and staff about a shadow man, this bizarre spider-like entity that reportedly crawled along the walls and ceilings. And bringing it back to a grim empirical reality, the local potter's field there is just filled with rows upon rows of unmarked graves identifying forgotten patients by nothing but a number. And just down the road lies the Freetown Fall River State Forest, which is widely and fittingly known as the Cursed Forest. This incredibly dense 5,400-acre brush essentially became a literal dumping ground for murder victims. Back in the late 1970s and 80s, it was the site of the notorious Fall River satanic cult murders. Police were finding mutilated animal carcasses arranged in man-made clearings, and several young women were tragically murdered as part of these cult activities. So once again, we're seeing empirical, terrifying true crime woven directly into the daily fabric of the triangle.
Section 4. Cryptids, Ghosts, and UFOs. Now, let's come up for air and rise back to the surface level of this iceberg. Let's look at how this dark, incredibly heavy history seems to act as a magnet for wild, modern-day paranormal phenomena.
What's absolutely fascinating here is that we have actual primary source documents backing this up. These are official investigation logs detailing bizarre UFO sightings right in the Bridgewater area. Look at that description from 1979. Someone reported a craft shaped literally like home plate on a baseball diamond, with a bright red light on top and rows of white and red lights around the edges. Sightings here date all the way back to 1760. Even trained law enforcement officers in the 1990s were officially reporting massive triangular-shaped crafts hovering silently over the trees.
And of course, the sightings don't stop in the sky. The triangle is famous for its cryptids. We've got the Native American folklore describing pukwudgies, these 3 to 4 foot tall tricksters with gray skin that are known to lure people off cliffs. We have Bigfoot sightings. In April 1970, a massive hairy creature reportedly lifted the rear end of a police cruiser entirely into the air before dropping it with a huge bang. Then there are the Thunderbirds. In 1971, a well-respected Norton police sergeant reported an enormous bird with an 8 to 12 foot wingspan taking flight near the swamp. Notice a pattern here? We aren't just talking about unverified rumors. Empirical, reliable observers, like trained police officers, are frequently the ones reporting these impossible creatures.
Section 5. The Vortex Theory. So, we've seen the history, we've covered the true crime, and we've talked about the monsters. But why? Why does this specific 200-square-mile patch of Massachusetts act as a giant magnet for such bizarre and terrifying activity?
Well, researchers generally look to a few core theories to try and explain the triangle. Some point to an ancient curse stemming from the desecration of sacred Wampanoag burial grounds and the lingering anger of the deity Hockomock. Others believe it's more about generational trauma, a psychic scar left behind by the sheer, devastating brutality of King Philip's War. Then, from a scientific or paranormal angle, some experts suggest the area is a natural vortex, like a literal window where the standard laws of physics simply don't operate normally. And finally, there's a geological theory. The region actually has an unusually high concentration of quartz rock. Some believe this acts almost like a giant battery, naturally amplifying and storing electromagnetic or paranormal energy.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Does the land remember? When a geographical area absorbs centuries of war, institutional abuse, and bloodshed, does that trauma simply vanish, or does it manifest into the shadow men, the UFOs, and the folklore we still see today? It's a deeply fascinating question about how our history continues to shape our modern reality. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, keep learning.